Snow whipped across the frozen plains of Krythar like sharp knives. The wind howled, rattling the skeletal remains of abandoned structures buried beneath the ice. Amid the storm, a tiny figure crawled through the snow, her small hands raw and bleeding from the frost. Lyra, a human child no older than 10, struggled to keep moving. Her breath came in ragged puffs, fogging in the icy air. She could barely see through the blinding flurries, but she knew she had to keep going. The explorers who had brought her here, strangers who claimed to be guardians, had abandoned her. They called her weak and useless, leaving her to the storm with nothing but a tattered cloak and a small satchel. Lyra remembered their harsh voices and the cold disdain in their eyes. Tears froze on her cheeks as she whispered to herself, "I have to survive. I can't give up. I won't." Her small feet sank into drifts that seemed endless. Every step was agony, but she forced herself onward. The ice beneath her cracked in some places, and she almost fell into a hidden crevasse. She grabbed the edge with frozen fingers, shivering violently, and dragged herself up. Her entire body ached. Her lips were blue, and her hair stuck to her frozen face. She felt as if the world itself wanted her to disappear. Suddenly the ground trembled beneath her. A low, rumbling sound vibrated through the snow, like the heartbeat of a giant. Lyra froze, her wide eyes scanning the storm. Something enormous moved through the blizzard, its shape dark and powerful against the whiteness. Her heart thumped in fear. Could it be a creature like the stories she had heard of dragons that roamed these lands? The shadow drew closer, revealing the massive form of a dragon. His scales shimmered through the storm like molten metal, glowing faintly with heat that melted the snow near him. His eyes, golden and deep, studied her with a strange intelligence. Lyra's breath caught. She had expected to die alone in the ice, but now something alive, something huge and terrifying, stood before her. She wanted to scream, but the cold stole her voice. The dragon lowered his massive head, bringing his glowing eyes level with hers. He did not snarl or roar. Instead, he seemed to examine her, curiosity and caution in his gaze. Lyra realized slowly that he was not attacking. The warmth radiating from his wings made the snow around her hiss and melt. Lyra took a hesitant step forward, shivering violently. I'm cold," she whispered, her voice trembling. She had no idea if the dragon understood her, but she felt that it did not matter. The warmth that surrounded him was enough. The dragon, whom she would later learn was called Piran, shifted his wings to cover her. Flames licked the edges of his wings, not burning her, but melting the ice and snow that had been clinging to her coat. Lyra pressed herself against him, feeling a safety she had never known. The storm still raged around them, but under his wings, it felt like a small pocket of calm. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time seemed meaningless in the endless storm. Lyra's body relaxed slowly as she absorbed the warmth, and her fear began to fade into awe. The dragon's presence was both terrifying and comforting. She reached out a small hand and touched his scales. They were hot but solid, strong and alive. Piran did not flinch. Instead, he lowered his head further, allowing her to rest against him. Finally, the storm began to ease slightly. Lyra looked up at Piran and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." The dragon blinked slowly as if acknowledging her words, though he did not speak. She realized then that survival was not just about strength, it was about trust, courage, and connection. Lyra could feel her body thawing, her muscles no longer locked in ice. She pressed closer to Piran's chest and let herself rest, safe for the first time in days. She imagined the explorers, far away, never expecting that the small, abandoned human they had dismissed could survive. But here she was, protected by a creature they had only told her to fear. As night began to fall, the storm's fury diminished, and the stars peeked through the clouds. Lyra's eyes, heavy with exhaustion, scanned the vast expanse around them. Even in the cold and desolation, life persisted. Piran's heat kept the frost at bay, and she felt a spark of hope. Maybe she was not meant to die in the ice after all. Maybe survival, even in the harshest conditions, was possible. The dragon nudged her gently with his snout, waking her from her drifting thoughts. Lyra looked into his golden eyes, and though she could not understand him, she knew one thing. He would not let her face the cold alone. He had chosen her as much as she had chosen him in that desperate moment. As Lyra clung to Piran's warm body, she felt a determination grow inside her. She would not just survive, she would learn, explore, and find a way to repay the creature who had saved her. The ice storm had brought them together, and somehow they had both become stronger because of it. The night fell fully, and the wind still whispered around them, but inside Piran's wings, Lyra found warmth, protection, and a spark of courage she had never known. For the first time she felt that the impossible could be possible, and that even a small human, abandoned and alone, could change her own destiny with the help of a dragon's fire. And so, as the cold stars shone above the frozen plains of Krythar, Lyra rested in the heart of the dragon's wings, knowing that she was no longer alone, and that her story, the story of survival, trust and courage, had only just begun. The storm had passed, leaving the frozen plains of Krythar shimmering under a pale sunlight that barely warmed the land. Snow crunched beneath Piran's massive claws as he carried Lyra on his back, his wings tucked close to shield her from the still biting wind. The human girl clung to his scaled neck, her small fingers gripping tightly, her body still recovering from the frostbite that had nearly claimed her life. Lyra's eyes were wide as she stared at the dragon's enormous form. She had survived the ice storm because of him, but now, traveling on his back, the vastness of the world and the power of her companion filled her with awe. "You're really big," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Piran lowered his head, letting her rest against him, and emitted a low, rumbling sound, a sound that she instinctively felt as calm reassurance. They moved slowly across the frozen plains, navigating treacherous cliffs and jagged ice formations. Piran's heat melted small patches of snow beneath them, leaving a trail of steam that lingered in the air. Lyra marveled at the sensation. She had never felt warmth like this before, warmth that was not only physical but also comforting in a way that made fear feel distant and irrelevant. "You saved me," Lyra said softly, almost to herself. "I don't even know how to thank you." Piran did not speak, but his wings shifted, and the heat wrapped more tightly around her, as if answering that gratitude was unnecessary. The dragon did not require thanks. His purpose was simply to protect. Hours passed as they traveled. Lyra began to notice how the dragon moved. Each step was deliberate, careful, and intelligent. He did not rush. He did not stumble. It was as though he understood the fragile balance between strength and caution. Lyra tried to imagine what it would be like to see the world from Piran's eyes, to sense the wind, the snow, and the life hidden beneath the ice. She realized how much she could learn from him if she paid attention. The first real test came when they approached a frozen canyon, its walls steep and jagged. The narrow path was dangerous, and one wrong step could send them plunging into the icy depths below. Lyra's heart raced as Piran slowed, his claws finding the best grip on the slippery ice. She held on tightly, trusting him completely, though fear still bubbled inside her. "Steady," she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra she had used during the storm. "We can do this. He knows the way." Piran's wings flickered with heat, and the ice beneath them softened slightly, creating a small path where they could walk safely. Lyra marveled at the precision of his movements. Every muscle, every claw, every scale was in harmony with the world around him. She had never seen anything so perfect. As night fell, the temperature dropped again and darkness swallowed the plains. Lyra shivered despite the dragon's warmth. Piran settled in a small, sheltered canyon, curling his wings around her like a living blanket. She could feel the fire beneath his scales, radiating heat that penetrated the cold deep into her bones. It was unlike any fire she had known, soft, constant, and alive. "You're amazing," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the cold wind. Piran let out a soft rumble, vibrating through her chest and soothing her nerves. Lyra's eyes grew heavy as she realized she could finally rest, truly rest, without fear of being alone. The dragon's warmth had healed not only her body but also the terror that had gripped her since the storm. During the night Lyra dreamed. In her dreams she was flying beside Piran, soaring over mountains and frozen lakes. She could feel the wind rushing past her, the heat of the dragon beneath her, and the freedom of movement she had never known. She woke before dawn, feeling stronger, braver, and ready to face the journey ahead. The following day they continued across the frozen plains. Lyra began to notice small signs of life beneath the ice, faint trails of creatures, glimmers of plants, and hidden pockets of warmth. Piran seemed to sense them too, pausing occasionally to investigate or adjust their path. Lyra realized that this dragon did not just protect her. He taught her. He showed her the subtle ways of the world, the hidden rhythms, the quiet signals, the things that could be fatal if ignored. She began to mimic him. When he paused, she looked and listened. When he moved, she tried to understand why. Slowly, a bond formed that went beyond survival. Lyra was learning from Piran, and Piran, in his silent way, seemed to recognize her determination and courage. One afternoon they encountered a broken bridge of ice spanning a deep crevasse. Lyra froze, her stomach twisting with fear. "We can't cross that," she whispered. Piran lowered himself, letting the warmth from his wings create a solid path of melted ice that hardened into a safe trail. Lyra stepped carefully, trusting him completely. Halfway across, a gust of wind threatened to throw her off balance, but Piran's tail flicked, steadying her. She realized that he was not just carrying her. He was teaching her how to face danger, how to trust instincts, and how to act with courage. By nightfall, they reached a small cave hidden beneath a glacier. Piran curled around her once more, his fire creating a protective dome of warmth. Lyra stared at his glowing eyes, feeling a deep gratitude that words could not capture. She had survived the ice storm, the frozen plains, and the treacherous terrain, all because of him. But she also knew she had learned something vital. Survival was not just about being protected. It was about learning, understanding, and growing stronger even in the harshest conditions. As she drifted to sleep, wrapped in the dragon's heat, Lyra realized that she was no longer the frightened orphan who had crawled through the storm. She had become someone braver, someone resilient, and someone ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And beside her, Piran's flame glowed steadily, a living reminder that even in the coldest, most desolate places, warmth, courage, and trust could create hope. Morning light broke through the cave, illuminating the frost-covered walls. Lyra opened her eyes and looked up at Piran. "Where are we going next?" she asked softly. Piran blinked, then lifted his massive wings, spreading them wide. Without words, he communicated that their journey was far from over. Together, human and dragon would face the frozen world, and together they would survive. For Lyra, the dragon's flame was no longer just heat. It was hope, courage, and the beginning of a bond that would change both of their destinies forever. The ice could no longer frighten her. With Piran's burning wings around her, she knew that nothing, not storm, ice, or solitude, could stop her from surviving, learning, and growing stronger each day. The sky above Krythar darkened again, clouds rolling in like giant waves ready to crash upon the frozen plains. Lyra clutched Piran's scaled neck, her small body trembling not from cold this time, but from anticipation. The storm was returning, fiercer than before, but she no longer felt the helpless fear she had known during the first blizzard. She had survived with Piran's help, and now she knew she could face the storm alongside him. Piran moved steadily, each step calculated and sure, his massive claws gripping the ice without slipping. His wings were tucked close to shield Lyra from the sharp wind, but every so often he lifted them slightly, allowing his fire to melt patches of snow that blocked their path. Lyra pressed herself closer to him, feeling the comforting warmth radiating from his body. The cold still stung her face and hands, but it no longer held power over her. "Hold on tight," she whispered to herself, remembering the lessons she had learned from the first journey. Every step mattered, every movement could be dangerous, and the storm was unforgiving. Piran's tail swept behind him, clearing debris and alerting Lyra to hidden cracks in the ice. She began to notice the subtle cues he gave, the twitch of his wings, the shift of his weight, the glance of his golden eyes, signs that guided her as much as his strength did. As they climbed a steep ridge, a wall of wind struck them, pushing Lyra nearly off balance. Piran lowered his head and growled softly, using his bulk to shield her from the gust. She gripped his scales tightly, her fingers freezing but her spirit warming with courage. She realized she could trust him completely. Not just to protect her but to teach her how to survive. Hours passed and the storm intensified. Snow whipped across the plains in sharp needles, and the wind carried the scent of ice and distant rockfalls. Lyra's small legs ached, her arms trembled, but she focused on Piran's rhythm. Each step, each breath, each movement synchronized with hers. She began to anticipate his actions, moving with him rather than against him. The dragon was no longer just a protector. He was a teacher and she was learning quickly. The first real challenge of the journey came when they reached a canyon carved by ancient glaciers. The walls were steep and jagged, and the ice beneath their feet cracked like brittle glass. Lyra's stomach twisted in fear. "We can't cross that," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Piran did not speak, but he shifted his massive wings, radiating heat that softened the ice into a solid path. He lowered himself, allowing her to step carefully along his back as he navigated the treacherous terrain. Halfway across, a sudden gust of wind threatened to throw her off balance. Lyra froze, her heart pounding. Piran's tail flicked sharply, nudging her gently and steadying her feet. She realized then that this journey was not just about enduring the storm, it was about learning to move with it, to anticipate it, to respect it. Every danger became a lesson, every obstacle a challenge to grow stronger. As night fell, they reached a sheltered alcove beneath an overhanging cliff. Piran curled his wings around her, his fire creating a protective dome of warmth. Lyra shivered as she settled against him, but the heat seeped into her bones, chasing away the fear. She realized that even in the harshest storm she was safe. Not because the dragon was strong, but because she had learned to trust him and herself. During the night, she watched the storm from beneath Piran's wings. The lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the frozen plains in brilliant white and blue. The wind howled like a wild creature, but Lyra no longer felt powerless. She had survived storms before and she knew she could survive this one too. Piran's warmth and steady presence were constant, unchanging, and it gave her strength she did not know she possessed. The following morning the storm subsided slightly, leaving a gray light that barely pierced the clouds. Lyra and Piran continued their journey, moving toward a distant ridge that seemed to hold promise of safer ground. Along the way Lyra began to notice signs of life, small creatures burrowing beneath the ice, glimmers of frost-covered plants, and faint trails that hinted at hidden pathways. Piran paused at each sign, teaching her to see what others might miss. Lyra learned quickly. She began pointing out hidden cracks, warning him of slippery ice, and even noticing subtle changes in the wind that could signal danger. Piran's golden eyes flicked to her, and though he did not speak, Lyra felt a sense of pride and recognition in his gaze. She was no longer just a human in need of protection. She was a companion, learning from him and growing stronger with every step. As the day wore on, the terrain became more challenging. Jagged ice formations rose like frozen towers, and hidden crevasses threatened at every turn. Piran moved with care, but Lyra also began to move with purpose. She listened to the sound of cracking ice, watched the patterns of snow, and followed the warmth radiating from Piran to guide her steps. Together they were no longer just surviving, they were thriving in a world that had once seemed determined to destroy her. By evening, they reached a valley that offered shelter from the worst of the storm. Piran settled on a patch of exposed rock, curling his wings around Lyra to keep her warm. She pressed against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the heat of his scales. I think I can do this," she whispered. The storm had tested her courage, her patience, and her trust, but she had endured every challenge. Piran rumbled softly, a sound that vibrated through her chest and reassured her. Lyra realized that their journey through the storm had taught her more than survival. It had taught her to trust, to observe, to move with purpose, and to find strength within herself. She was still small, still human, but she was no longer helpless. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, Lyra looked up at Piran's glowing eyes. "Where do we go next?" she asked softly. Piran lifted his wings slightly, letting the warmth flow over her, and then gestured with a flick of his head toward the distant mountains. Though he did not speak, Lyra understood. The journey was far from over. And so, human and dragon moved forward together, learning, surviving, and growing stronger with every step. The storm had tested them, but it had also forged a bond that could not be broken. Lyra's courage had grown, Piran's trust in her had deepened, and together, they faced the frozen world with hope, determination, and the knowledge that no storm, no matter how fierce, could separate them. For Lyra, the journey through the storm was more than survival. It was the beginning of understanding, of learning from a creature greater than herself, and of discovering that even in the coldest, harshest places, courage, trust, and warmth could light the way forward. The storm was no longer a threat, it was a path, and together she and Piran were ready to walk it. Lyra woke to the cold morning air, but the warmth of Piran's wings still lingered around her. The dragon stirred, stretching his massive wings, and letting the sunlight glint off his molten-colored scales. Today the plains of Krythar were quieter, the storm's fury behind them, yet the wind carried a chill that reminded Lyra how fragile life could be on this frozen world. She climbed onto Piran's back, her small hands gripping the thick scales along his neck. Today he would take her somewhere new, somewhere she had never imagined. The dragon moved with silent strength, navigating a path that wound between glaciers and jagged ice cliffs. Lyra leaned forward, her eyes scanning the ground below. Something about this place felt different. The snow here was older, layered in strange patterns. Glimmers of metal and stone peeked through the ice, unnatural shapes that seemed out of place in the frozen desert. Her curiosity tugged at her. "What is that?" she whispered, pointing to a strange outline beneath the ice. Piran slowed, lowering his wings slightly so that Lyra could get a better look. The ice beneath them glowed faintly as if it held secrets. Lyra noticed symbols etched into the frozen surface, lines and shapes that reminded her of books and lessons she had once studied. She gasped. These are markings. Someone left them here a long time ago. Piran let out a soft rumble, and Lyra realized he understood her excitement. He shifted carefully, breaking the ice in a controlled way with his fire to reveal a hidden entrance below. The heat melted a circular patch, forming a doorway into a cavern that had been sealed for centuries. Lyra's heart raced with fear and wonder. She had survived the storm, learned from the dragon, and now she was about to uncover something extraordinary. The cavern was vast, its walls shimmering with frost that reflected Piran's firelight. Strange symbols and carvings decorated every surface, telling stories of dragons and humans who had walked together long before Lyra's time. She traced the shapes with her fingers, feeling a connection that went beyond words. They knew us. Humans and dragons. We weren't always enemies, she murmured. Piran rumbled softly, nudging her forward as if encouraging her to explore further. Deeper inside, Lyra found remnants of machinery and glowing devices buried beneath centuries of ice. She touched them carefully, amazed at how advanced the technology was. Screens flickered to life under her fingertips, revealing images of dragons and humans working side by side, sharing knowledge, building cities in harmony. Her mind raced. We could have been like this, we could have worked together, shared everything. Piran's golden eyes seemed to shine with approval, as if acknowledging her understanding. Hours passed as Lyra explored, decoding patterns and unlocking small mechanisms. She discovered maps of the galaxy, showing how dragons had guided human explorers, protecting them across frozen worlds and dangerous terrains. Lyra felt a spark of pride. If she could learn even a fraction of what these ancients knew, she could help restore that bond. But the cavern was not without dangers. Ice shifted, and small crevices opened underfoot, reminding her that Krythar was still an unforgiving world. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the cavern. Lyra froze. Piran stiffened, his scales bristling. From the shadows, small predators emerged, creatures adapted to the icy caverns, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They hissed and circled, but Piran stepped forward, spreading his wings. Flames licked the edges of the cavern, casting a protective glow that kept the predators at bay. Lyra felt a thrill of fear and excitement. She had faced danger with him before, but now she saw that survival also meant understanding threats and responding with courage and intelligence. Together, they moved deeper into the cavern, uncovering a chamber at its heart. In the center lay a frozen statue of a dragon with a human beside it, their hands reaching toward one another. Symbols on the base explained that this was a record of the first human-dragon alliance, a time when both species had shared knowledge, protection, and respect. Lyra touched the ice covering the statue, feeling a warmth that seemed to pass from the past into the present. This is what we lost, she whispered. Piran leaned closer, his head brushing against hers, sharing the silent understanding that the bond could be renewed. Lyra's attention turned to a series of crystal-like devices along the walls. When she touched them, they activated, projecting holographic images of ancient cities, dragons soaring alongside humans, and fleets traveling across the stars. She realized that this knowledge could change everything if shared. Piran nudged her gently as if to remind her that learning was not enough, they would need to act. She nodded, determination filling her small frame. The cavern held secrets not only of the past but also warnings. Symbols etched into the ice spoke of betrayals and conflicts, of humans who abandoned dragons and dragons who withdrew in anger. Lyra understood that the world was complicated, and that rebuilding trust would be difficult. But she also felt hope. If she could survive the storm and learn from Piran, perhaps she could survive the challenges ahead. As night fell, Lyra and Piran made camp within the cavern. She rested against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the warmth of his scales. Her mind replayed the day's discoveries, the ancient alliance, the hidden technology, and the knowledge that humans and dragons were meant to work together. Piran's wings wrapped around her protectively, a living shield against the cold and the dangers of Krythar. Lyra whispered to him, "We have to bring this back, the world needs to know." Piran's rumble vibrated through her, a silent promise that he would stand beside her. She realized that the journey through the ice, the storms, and the ancient ruins had not only saved her life but had also given her purpose. She was no longer just a human orphan, she was a bridge between species, a keeper of knowledge and a beacon of hope. The next morning they emerged from the cavern, stepping into a world that seemed less desolate and more full of possibility. The ice sparkled in the morning sun, reflecting a new clarity. Lyra looked at Piran, feeling a surge of gratitude and determination. Together, they had uncovered secrets beneath the ice that could change the future of humans and dragons alike. And as they moved forward, Lyra understood that their journey was far from over. The frozen plains held more mysteries, more challenges, and more opportunities to prove that trust, courage, and partnership could overcome even the harshest cold. Piran's wings stretched wide, glowing with heat and promise, and Lyra held on, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that the secrets beneath the ice were only the beginning. The sun rose over the frozen plains of Krythar, casting pale gold light over the ice and snow. Lyra stood on a high ridge, her hair whipping in the cold wind, and looked across the vast world below. Piran's wings stretched wide behind her, each movement sending waves of warmth into the air. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with storms, ice, and hidden dangers, but now the horizon seemed brighter, full of possibilities. Today she would take the next step toward something greater. Lyra had learned much from Piran: survival, courage, trust, and patience. But more than that, she had discovered knowledge buried beneath the ice, remnants of a time when humans and dragons had lived in harmony. Ancient symbols, frozen cities, and glowing devices had revealed the truth. Humans and dragons were meant to work together, not fight. And now, Lyra understood that it was her task to bring that knowledge back to the world. Piran lowered his massive head, nudging her gently. "It's time," she whispered, feeling the weight of responsibility in her small hands. The dragon's golden eyes locked on hers, full of understanding. Together, they would reach the nearby settlement, where humans and dragons could witness that the bond between their species could be restored. The flight was swift but careful. Lyra clung tightly to Piran's neck as he lifted into the air, the wind rushing past them, the world below a blur of ice and stone. She felt alive in a way she never had before, each gust of wind and surge of heat reminding her of the strength she had gained. Fear no longer controlled her, courage and hope guided her. Below them, the human settlement appeared, a cluster of frost-covered buildings surrounded by jagged ice cliffs. Dragons circled in the sky above, wary and distant, their eyes flicking toward Piran and Lyra. The humans gathered near the edges of their homes, uncertain, curious, and tense. The rumors had spread quickly. A dragon and a human orphan traveling together across the frozen plains had discovered secrets long forgotten. Now they came to see for themselves. Piran descended slowly, his wings stirring snow into the air, and landed in the center of the settlement. Lyra slid off his back, her boots crunching on the ice. She looked up at the crowd, humans and dragons alike, and felt her heart pound. She was small, young, and untrained, yet here she was, standing in the open ready to speak. "Humans, dragons," she began, her voice steady despite the cold, "we were not always enemies. Long ago our species worked together. We shared knowledge, protection, and courage. I have seen it. I have seen the proof." She gestured to Piran, then to the glowing devices she had uncovered beneath the ice. Holographic images sprang to life, showing dragons and humans side by side, flying together, building together, protecting each other across the galaxy. The crowd was silent. Humans whispered to one another, astonished by the images and the stories they told. Dragons tilted their heads, their golden eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and recognition. For generations, both species had believed the other could not be trusted. Now the proof was undeniable. The alliance had existed and it could exist again. Lyra stepped closer to Piran, her small hand brushing his scales. "It's possible," she continued. "We can learn from the past. We can work together again. Not as enemies, not as masters and servants, but as partners. We can survive the storms, protect our worlds, and grow stronger together." A large dragon stepped forward from the crowd, scales dark and shimmering, wings tensed in readiness. Lyra's heart raced, but she did not step back. The dragon sniffed the air, assessing Piran and her. Then, slowly it bowed its head in respect. One by one, other dragons followed, lowering their wings and moving closer. Trust, once impossible, was forming before her eyes. Humans too began to step forward. Leaders who had doubted, warriors who had feared, and ordinary villagers who had struggled through generations of cold isolation. All came closer, eyes wide with hope. They reached out to dragons, offering hands and gestures of peace. Lyra watched, amazed, as barriers dissolved and a fragile understanding began to take root. Piran lowered himself, allowing other dragons to approach and feel his warmth. Lyra helped guide them, showing how fire could be shared safely, how strength could protect instead of harm. The settlement buzzed with new energy, a mixture of cautious curiosity and excitement. Humans and dragons moved side by side, learning to trust, to communicate, and to cooperate. As the day progressed, Lyra realized that this was only the beginning. The frozen plains of Krythar were vast and dangerous, and countless other humans and dragons lived in fear and isolation. But if this small settlement could begin to heal, the message could spread. One dragon and one human had shown the path. Now others would follow. Piran nudged Lyra gently, his warmth reassuring her. She smiled, realizing that she had grown far beyond the abandoned orphan who had crawled through the ice storm. She had survived, learned, and inspired others. Together with Piran, she had begun to restore a bond that could change the future. Evening fell, casting long shadows across the settlement. Fires burned, lighting the ice and snow with golden warmth. Dragons curled around humans, protecting them, sharing stories, and exploring the limits of their new trust. Lyra stood beside Piran, feeling the heat of his scales and the pulse of life that ran through him. She had never felt more alive. "We did it," she whispered softly. Piran rumbled in response, a sound that felt like agreement, pride, and friendship all at once. The journey through storms, ice, and ancient secrets had led to this moment. The world was not perfect and challenges remained, but a new path had opened. Lyra looked up at the stars beginning to glimmer in the night sky. Dragons and humans alike were learning, growing, and sharing. The ice storm of her past seemed distant, almost like a dream. What remained real was the warmth, the bond, and the promise of a new future. And so, on the frozen plains of Krythar, a new alliance was born. Not through fear or power, but through courage, understanding, and trust. Lyra had survived the impossible, and together with Piran she had shown that even in the coldest, most desolate places hope could thrive. Humans and dragons could face the world together, and for the first time in centuries, both species knew that the future could be bright. Lyra climbed onto Piran's back one last time for the day, feeling the comfort of his warmth and the strength of his wings. As they soared above the settlement, looking down on the mingling of humans and dragons below, she realized that their journey was far from over, but now they faced the future together. The frozen plains of Krythar, once a place of fear and solitude, were now a symbol of trust, courage, and the power of connection. For Lyra and Piran, the storm had passed. The ice had revealed its secrets. And the world, united through human and dragon, would never be the same again.